It's Tuesday, so that means it's time for another top 10 video. This time, last week, my patrons' runner-up vote was top 10 polymorph forms. So this is going to be a little interesting because we've never done one like this before. I think you're going to figure out what the rules are, but if you want to see what they are, stay tuned. There really needs to be more beasts for polymorph. What's going on, folks? Ted from Immersion here again, and we're going to talk about Polymorph. I don't really know how much more to say. I'll just jump over here to D&D Beyond. This is the spell, Polymorph, the 4th level spell, accessible by bards, druids, sorcerers, wizards, and the trickery domain cleric. It is a 4th level spell, and the reason we're talking about this is you can transform a creature you can see within range into a new form. This can be a willing creature, and they can choose to fail the saving throw, or an unwilling creature must make a wisdom saving throw. And basically, you pick a beast whose challenge rating is equal to or less than the target's level, than the target's or the target's level if they don't have a challenge rating. So again, if you're targeting an enemy and their challenge rating 2, it has to be a beast of challenge rating 2 or below. If you're targeting an ally and the ally is level 5, it has to be a challenge rating 5 or below. So it's limited to only beasts, which is unfortunate as well, because that's an area that really needs some more breadth. There's a lot of challenge rating 0 to challenge rating 1 beasts, and it gets your options get limited and limited the higher up you go. So that's what we're going to talk about, my top 10 polymorph forms. I'll be up front. It looks like a lot of them are more on the higher end, but there are some good low-level ones as well. Number 10. I realize it's Wednesday, but hey, I started recording on Tuesday, so I guess that counts. Giant shark. So this is, without a doubt, with the exception of possibly the sperm whale, which was added in Icewind Dale Rime of the Frost Maiden, this is usually considered to be the best possible aquatic form. And I'm still going to say it probably is, for a couple of reasons. One, we've got pretty good swim speed, right? 50 feet, we can move pretty quickly. We've got blind sight out to 60 feet, so that's pretty good. And kind of the crux of the ability here is blood frenzy, which is a thing that most shark-type creatures have, which is if a creature doesn't have full hit points, it has advantage on attack rolls. This is also something that don't feel, again, in a homebrew scenario, you could drop this on a bunch of other monsters and it increases them, but it has a +9 to hit, and it does 3d10 plus 6 damage, and potentially with advantage if they've already taken it. Plus, you have a +5 Constitution modifier, so you are going to be taking on the Constitution modifier of the creature. So you have 126 hit points. If you use this on yourself, and someone hits you to knock you out of your shark form, you'll at least have a decent Constitution to maintain the saving throw. To maintain concentration, rather. But the reason this is number 10 is because it is an aquatic form. I thought I would kind of get that out of the way up front. This is either going to be huge, super important, something you're going to deal with all the time, or something you're going to deal with not at all. I've had a handful of different ship-based combats and things in my campaigns, but I'm not running like Ghosts of Saltmarsh or some sort of water-based campaign. If you are, this will be pretty important. It also is challenge rating 5, so by the time you actually have access to the spell, you'll be level 7, so you'll be able to access it. It's just what's your awareness of giant sharks to know to turn somebody into one. Number 9. Tressym. So this is an interesting one because as you can see from the 2 tabs I have open, there is both the Tressym and then the Tressym monstrosity. And this is one of those weird things where Wizards of the Coast sometimes changes a monster's type. For example, Cragcat used to be a beast and then they changed it to a monstrosity. But they're both still in the system in D&D Beyond, so I'm going to say that it still counts. So this is Tressym is a beast here. And it's because it has good detection abilities that I'm putting this on the list, right? Because polymorph isn't always necessarily about damage. It can be about recon and scouting and other things. First of all, you take on the intelligence, you take on all the statistics of the creature you polymorph either someone into or yourself into. A Tressym has an intelligence of 11, which I also think is funny because depending on what kind of caster you are, turning yourself into a winged cat might actually make you smarter if you dump intelligence. But it has some pretty cool abilities. Yes, you don't have a ton of hit points because you're a cat, but you're immune to poison in the poison condition. Again, if there's a poison gas field that you need to go through, you could polymorph into a Tressym and fly through it at no downside. You also have detect invisibility. Within 60 feet, magical invisibility fails to conceal anything from the Tressym's sight. It can also sense whether a substance is poisonous by taste, touch, or smell. So a Tressym can smell poison as well as having advantage on perception checks that rely on smell. So you have a lot of things going for you in terms of, you could pretend to be someone in the party's familiar. You still can't speak, right? You understand common, but you can't speak, but you're polymorphed, so you kind of have some more knowledge. But you could, indicate, well, that's the other thing. You have an intelligence of 11. You could indicate to people, like, maybe don't do that. You're also a cat, so maybe, like, knock the cup over, and it just seems like you're being a cat, and really you just save somebody's life. And then it also, this is less important because you are only a Tressym for a time, but their memories are super good as well, which may or may not have usefulness. I'm sure we've seen how things go where people polymorph into something with a very low intelligence, and I feel like 9 times out of 10, most DMs just basically give them full sentience and control over their form. But if you transform into something with an intelligence of 1, you are pretty much, at your most base instincts, following what makes sense. With the Tressym, again, you have intelligence enough to know not to do things, and +5 perception checks, +4 stealth checks. You also could become more aware or more stealthy by turning yourself into a cat. Just to throw it out there, the monstrosity version was introduced in Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus. The version you see here was introduced in Storm King's Thunder. So I brought that up. I also wanted to bring it up because if you don't own Storm King's Thunder, you probably were unaware of this. But now that the one came out in Baldur's Gate, you may be aware of that. But all of the statistics for it are exactly the same. It just has a monstrosity typing and the flavor text is different. So, I don't know. Number 8. The Hulking Crab. It's me. You know how much I love Kingler and other crab-related creatures, so you knew there had to be one somewhere on this list. Also, Hulking Crab comes again from Storm King's Thunder, so if you're unaware of that module in that book, then this is probably something that you're learning about for the first time. So this is a huge crab. We've got a 17 armor class because we've got our chitinous armor here. We have blind sight out to 30 feet, so that can again be useful for detection. But this is going to be probably more of a combat form. You can breathe air and water, so you have the benefit of being able to do that. And this shell camouflage, while it remains motionless with its eye stalks and pincers tucked close to its body, it resembles a natural formation or a pile of detritus. A creature within 30 feet of it can discern its true nature with a successful intelligence nature check. You also have multi-attack, 2 attacks. Your reach is 10 feet. Your claws do 3d10 plus 4 bludgeoning damage, and the target is grappled. So you have 2 claws, you can make 2 attacks a turn, and you can potentially lock down 2 people. Your strength is a 19, so you're in a pretty good spot there. 76 hit points, also good swim speed and a walk speed. Once again, your intelligence is only a 3 though, but it's one of the best crab creatures out there, so I had to put it on my list. Number 7. Brontosaurus. So this kind of brings up the ethical question of, do dinosaurs exist in your world to know how to polymorph somebody into them? It's the same kind of thing that a druid goes through, where they need to see a creature to be able to wild shape into a creature. It's, can you, if you read a book and see a Brontosaurus in a book and like a picture, is that enough for you to polymorph something into it, or is there any knowledge of these creatures? Because I feel like it just lets you pick a beast. So in theory, this, if you go to D&D Beyond and look at the list of beasts, this is one. So the reason I put the Brontosaurus on the list is, once again, this is a Volo's Guide to Monster, but it's gargantuan. So your size is massive. You could use that to an advantage as far as transporting people, party members, large goods. You have a +6 Constitution saving throw, again, for maintaining concentration if you're casting this on yourself. Your intelligence is a 2, though, so keep that in mind. But your stomp has a reach. You have a stomp, mind you, with your feet that has a reach of 20 feet, which is a pretty decent distance. You deal 5d8 plus 5 bludgeoning damage, and the creature needs to succeed on a strength save or be knocked prone. And your tail attack also has a reach of 20 feet for 6d8 plus 5 bludgeoning damage. So you have some pretty nasty range, being a creature of this size. You also have a decent chunk of hit points, 121, and a natural armor of 15. So there are worse forms to choose for combat, but probably the biggest consideration is just the size of you versus the size of the area that you're fighting in. Number 6. Giant Octopus. This is another aquatic form. Now it says here that the octopus can only breathe underwater, but it can hold its breath for an hour above water. So that's something to consider. This could be a on-land form. It can hold its breath for an hour. Polymorph lasts for an hour. So as long as you don't lose your breath, you'll be able to stay in octopus form, or the creature that you're casting on will be able to stay in octopus form for an hour. They do have a swim speed of 60 feet, which gets you some pretty decent mobility in the water. A land speed of only 10 feet, but there's no reason you couldn't pick them up or carry them, or if it's in combat, I guess it doesn't really matter. You don't have a ton of hit points in octopus form, but your tentacles have a reach of 15 feet. So, even though you have slow movement, you have 15-foot reach, which will get you potentially, in theory, if you move 10 feet and then attack, that's basically like a 25-foot movement, as it were. Does 2d6 plus 3 bludgeoning damage. If they're a creature, they're grappled, and when they're grappled, they're also restrained. I'll remind you that restrained is that creature's speed becomes 0. Attacks against that creature have advantage, and their attacks have disadvantage. And they have disadvantage on dexterity saving throws. So you could, in theory, grapple somebody with a tentacle. We know you have multiple tentacle options, so you can do this potentially over multiple turns, allowing your allies to get multiple attacks with advantage, and their attacks to potentially break out of your grapple if they decide to not use their action to try and escape. If they try to attack their way out, their attacks are at disadvantage. You also have advantage on stealth checks made underwater with your underwater camouflage. And then again, if you're underwater, also you have the ink cloud. Once a short or long rest, it becomes a heavily obscured area, 20-foot radius for a minute. And then after you do it, you can use the dash action as a bonus action. It doesn't have it listed here for giant octopus. I think it's on the regular one, though, and this comes into the specifics of, a real world versus D&D. But, octopods, or octopi rather, can kind of squish themselves down really small. I'm sure you've seen a video on the internet. If you haven't, go look them up. They can basically move through the tiniest of spaces, because as long as their beak can fit through it, which is like the only hard part of their body, then their whole body can fit through it, because they can kind of like smush and like mold their body and stretch and pull themselves through. So it's not listed here. Like I said, I think it might be on the regular octopus where it says like, they can shrink themselves down to go through space of up to 1 inch or something like that. Does it have it here? It doesn't. Okay. So it doesn't have it listed like the ability to squeeze through things, but I would allow that in my game because I'm knowledgeable of that. So you should, again, potentially for sneaking into locations, if there's a small enough crack for you to fit your beak through, then your whole body could go through it. I also just really like the idea of the 15-foot reach tentacle grab. I think that's pretty cool. But it's tricky, right? Because I have to separate my mind from polymorph and wild shape. everything that I'm pretty much showing you on the list, from the second you're able to cast the polymorph spell, these are all options. And I didn't want to just go with all of the high level challenge rating 5 or higher monsters. I wanted to give variety throughout here, just to showcase some different options for you. Also, we have an intelligence of 4 as a giant octopus, so we're slightly smarter than some of the other forms we've had. You know, as we said, they're able to squeeze through open jars and all sorts of things like that. So octopi are pretty intelligent. Number 5. You knew it was going to be on here somewhere, right? The T-Rex. I don't think I need to explain myself more really than just saying the T-Rex. But you have multi-attack, a bite, and a tail attack. You're a huge beast. Let's see, you can't make them both against the same target. Your bite has a 10-foot reach for 40, 12, plus 7 piercing damage. The bite is a grapple if they're medium or smaller, and a restrain. And the tail is a 10-foot reach, 3d8 plus 7 bludgeoning damage. 136 hit points, 13 AC. It's a powerhouse. You come into the concept of a T-Rex has an intelligence of 2, so it's not the brightest creature. It's usually everyone's go-to. The only, I guess, other downside is you need to be level 8 to be able to transform yourself into one or your party members into one. So you won't be able, the second you get polymorph, it won't be immediately on your list. You'll have to wait a level. Not a huge deal. Again, I brought it up with the Brontosaurus, but there's the issue of, are you able to do it? Are you aware of a T-Rex enough to be able to cast it? Like, I mean, that's purposefully why in my homebrew world, I made a town where there is dinosaurs they're present. They're the beasts of burden in that town. So that, like, if someone plays a druid in my homebrew world, they can easily learn of dinosaurs to have them as an option, as well as for people to go and study. So they could, again, use polymorph and things like that. It's just like, it's cool, the T-Rex, but it's also like, I don't know, it has a bite and a tail, and it has multi-attack. That's good, but its hit points are pretty solid as well. But it's just, I mean, and I guess it's kind of flashy, but it's I don't know. There are other things, even some things we've already covered on this list, that have some really cool things going for them, like the giant shark's blood frenzy, blind sight, the poison detect on the Tressym, right? I mean, things like that. The T-Rex is good, don't get me wrong. You'll never be upset to use polymorph to turn into a T-Rex. But it's just, I don't know, it's not, it doesn't have, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but it's not like, it's over the top, yes, but it's just, I don't know, doesn't have a lot of options, I guess. You turn into a T-Rex to bite and tail, like you don't, that's it. I don't know, I can't really illustrate what I'm trying to say. I hope you kind of get what I'm saying, as I don't want to call it boring, because it's not, it's a dinosaur and it's cool, but it's just not, I don't know what I'm trying to say. But I did want to just point out, if we jump over to the list of beasts here on D&D Beyond, you know, there are 3 challenge rating 8 beasts. We have the huge giant crab from White Plume Mountain. I didn't put this one on the list because I thought multi-attack was more important from the hulking giant crab. We have the T-Rex. We have the sperm whale, which was just added in Icewind Dale. So that's only like a brand new thing as of like last week. And then we have Traxigor from Baldur's Gate Descended to Avernus. But Traxigor is a beast with spell casting, so that's why Traxigor is level 12. Also, that's a super unique, specific creature. Probably not something you could polymorph somebody into because you don't know that that creature exists. But my point is, there's only 3 challenge rating 8 beasts and the whole list of all of them, and you have like middling creature lists, like I said at the beginning, in like the 5-ish range, and then a whole bunch from 0 to 1. So there's not too many options out there for you. So usually one of the big ones that everybody transforms into once they are able to do so is the T-Rex. Number 4. Bristled Moorbounder from Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. So the Moorbounder here, there's the base Moorbounder and the bristled version. The bristled version has a lot going for it for only being challenge rating 3. So first of all, 70 feet of movement. This thing can book it across the battlefield. It also it's faster than a riding horse. So like, or any kind of horse really. So this could be a more useful means of overland travel potentially. If you wanted to go that route. It does have dark vision as well, which is something not a lot of beasts have. And then you've got your standing leap. Your long jump is 40 feet and your high jump is 20 feet with or without a running start. So this can also be great for just terrain. You could jump a 40-foot chasm and your movement speed is 70, so you could do that in a turn. And you could just straight up, I mean, you're a cat, right? So you could jump 20 feet straight up. That could be great for getting up on high ledges and traversing up things. You also have the barbed hide feature, which is at the start of each of your turn, anyone that's grappling you, you deal 2d4 piercing damage to anyone grappling you. So that could, if you're fighting other beasts and they're able to bite or whatever and grapple you, like some of the creatures we've already discussed, you're going to be dealing consistent damage to them each turn. And then you make 2 attacks, a blade and a claw attack. Your blade attack does 2d6 plus 4 slashing damage, so that's no small amount. And your claws do 4d4 plus 4 slashing damage. You are limited to your, again, 2 intelligence, but the fact that you have this kind of movement speed, 2 pretty powerful attacks, which you can use as an action, retributive damage for people grappling you, and ridiculous leaping ability, plus dark vision on top of all of that, this is a pretty solid choice. Again, it's challenge rating 3, so when you think about polymorph, like, well, I could turn into anything that's challenge rating 7 or anything else, challenge rating 3 may not be an option you want to pick, but, you know, maybe you're playing in a Wildmount game and, like, you want to blend in with a pack of Moorbounders for recon purposes. That's an option for you. But the speed, that's kind of the big thing here, is you can just move so fast. Number 3. Speaking of fast creatures, we have the giant elk. I put the giant elk above the bristled moorbounder because you may not necessarily be playing in a Wildmount game or have access to Wildmount creatures in your own game. So giant elk is on this list because of that. It has, again, a 60-foot movement speed, so it's going to be as fast as the fastest horse. It's also huge size, which means that you can put a decent amount of people on the back of a giant elk. It has a charge attack, so with that 60-foot movement speed, if you move 20 feet straight towards a target and hit with a ram attack, it does an extra 2d6 damage, and then they need to make a strength saving throw or be knocked prone. Your ram attack has 10-foot reach, so even if you move different directions and then run 20 feet, as long as you land within 10 feet of a creature, you can make a ram attack for 2d6 plus 4 bludgeoning. But that will then add an extra 2d6 on top of that, meaning 4d6 total, potentially a crit for 8d6. And your hoof attack does 4d8 plus 4 bludgeoning damage. Also, you can speak giant elk. So in theory, if you're playing against or with a character that has access to the giant elk language for some reason, you can in theory converse with them while polymorphed, or they can converse with you if you have giant elk while they are polymorphed. And yeah, it also has an intelligence of 7. So, you know, there are characters that will play with an intelligence of 7. So you can probably do relatively well as far as keeping control of yourself and knowing where to go and what to do. Illustrating plans, the fact that they can understand several other languages besides their own helps to, you know, deal with communication purposes. Which is something I feel like people don't really touch on. You know, you polymorph yourself into a creature that doesn't understand any language, and you have an intelligence of 2, and your party members tell you to go do something, you don't know what they're saying. Huh. Never really thought about that. Number 2. We already talked about it a little bit already, and I'm sure you knew it was coming, but the giant ape. This is, again, challenge rating 7, so it's accessible to you right out the gate from the second you have Polymorph. But it also is one of the only beasts out there with a ranged attack, and not even a short distance range attack. It goes out to 50 feet, up to 100 feet with disadvantage at long range. It has a decent chunk of hit points, so it'll be able to take a few hits. Its armor class is not great, but you know the hit points kind of make up for that. You've got a climb speed and a movement speed of 40 feet, which is pretty good. Your athletics check is a +9, so this could be used potentially to just break down doors as well as for grappling purposes. And you can make 2 fist attacks as with the multi-attack action, which have a 10-foot reach, dealing 3d10 plus 6 damage. Or again, the rock, which is 50 to 100 feet for the short and long range, and then does 76 plus 6 bludgeoning damage on a hit. Both of those hits also are +9 before you roll, so that's pretty good. And, you know, the rock is almost like a single target fireball's worth of damage, 76 plus 6, out to 50 feet. I would love it if the rock, you could make 2 rock attacks, but again, the fact that the damage is what I just said, I think is why they kept it to either 2 punches or 1 rock. I guess the only other downside is there's needs to be rocks around for you to be able to throw them, pick them up and throw them. But yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about it. It would be kind of interesting if you also had the sharpshooter feat, because from what I can tell, if you have sharpshooter, I think you might be able to access it from your giant ape form. So let's say you have sharpshooter and you cast polymorph on yourself. It might not work because I think you technically become the beast and have its abilities, so your other things don't count. But I thought it would be interesting to polymorph yourself into an ape, a giant ape. But with sharpshooter, your rock's range would now be 100 feet without disadvantage. And you could take a -5 on the attack roll to add +10 to damage. I don't think that technically works because of just the nature of polymorph, but I think it's really fun to think about. And I thought like, oh, you could do it as a druid, but I realized that druids, I don't think will ever have access to giant ape form, because I think it's divided, moon druids, it's your level divided by 3. So the most you will ever get will be a challenge rating 6, which is a bummer. Number 1. And I have number 1 as the giant owl. Now you may be saying, well, why did you pick a challenge rating 1/4 creature to be your number 1? And I think that's because giant owls are one of the best options for scouting, overland movement, and things like that. And as I stated at the start, polymorph doesn't necessarily just need to be about combat. So first of all, you have dark vision out to 120 feet. That's longer than any of the creatures we had on this list, if they had it at all. So you have great ability to see in the dark. You have an intelligence of 8, so you're as smart as most people dumping their intelligence stats, so you'll have no problems dealing with things in owl form. You have a +5 perception check and a +4 stealth check. As we stated with some of the earlier versions, you may be more aware or more stealthy as an owl than you are as a humanoid. You can speak giant owl and then understand several other languages. Again, if you happen to be in a scenario where someone in your party also speaks giant owl, that could be of use. You have advantage on perception checks relying on hearing or sight, so you are even better for scouting. You're an owl, so your flight is basically silent, replicated in your bonus to stealth. So flying around with 120-foot dark vision with advantage on hearing and sight perception checks means you'll likely be able to see whatever it is you're looking for. You're probably not going to be using combat too much, but you can deal 2d6 +1 slashing damage if you decide to go into combat as an owl. Your armor class is only a 12, your hit points are 19, so you are large size, so technically a small or medium creature could, in theory, ride you or be carried by you places, which is also something to consider, right? You have that movement speed and the flight. But the big one here is flyby too. So if you do find yourself in a pretty bad scenario, or you do decide to use this owl form in combat, your movement doesn't provoke attacks of opportunity. So you could do the standard thing that people do with a familiar owl from Find Familiar have it fly in, use the help action, and then fly away without taking attacks of opportunity because of flyby, or fly in, attack with your 2d6 plus 1 talons, and then fly away. You can go in up to 30 feet and then still fly 30 feet away with your 60-foot fly speed. Or, you know, fly away from somebody without provoking attacks of opportunity and then dash and fly 120 feet away. You're still within your dark vision's range, and you still have that advantage on the checks to see it. So I like thinking of non-conventional uses. I'm not making this up. I'm not original in this aspect, but I feel like people mostly either consider Polymorph as just a way to get more hit points to deal a ton of damage, or as a way to shut down an enemy by turning them into like a frog or something. But I like the concept of using it more towards, you know, recon, scouting. Another super common thing that I didn't mention on here, but I'll kind of give you a bonus one at the end here, is a horse, whether it be a war horse, a riding horse. No one, I mean, if you turn yourself into a horse and you walk into an enemy camp, or like are part of the stables, people don't automatically, they're not on edge to talk about their plans or whatever in the presence of a horse. You walk into the enemy encampment, you know, you're there as a horse, people discuss their plans, and you just walk back out. And now you have all the information, and all you had to, no fighting required, no potential failed stealth checks, you were there the whole time. Once again, the only downside doing this with Polymorph is you are limited by the horse's intelligence. So anyway, folks, that is my top 10 Polymorph forms. It's kind of tricky just because the nature of Polymorph. I went for more ones that you would be turning yourself or your party into. Obviously, you could also pick like a housefly to turn an enemy into, or something that it can fly around, or like a slug, so that it can barely move, and then you can just pick up your enemy and move them wherever you want. And I'm not even going to get into like the crazy things you could do, turn them into something small, drop them into your bag of holding and shut the lid. After 10 minutes, they run out of air, so they die in the bag of holding. And they were easy enough to put in there because they were a slug or a worm or what have you. There's lots of different things you can do with it that way, but I went with more ones to turn yourself into or your party members into. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. This one was, again, a little on the trickier side because, like, in theory, you probably should just go for all of the strongest versions of everything with the most hit points and the most damage and all that. But I wanted to provide some variability so it wasn't just the same thing in the same list everyone else has. So thank you again to my patrons over on Patreon for continuing to support me and the channel. I will see you all next time.